If I had a crystal ball and I could look into this crystal ball and tell you guys exactly where your business opportunities lie looking forward, what is working in the future, what is not working in the future, things that we should totally eliminate, things that we should totally start doing in order to see your business grow and flourish. Imagine how amazing that would be. Guys, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have the next best thing. We've recently just launched our opportunity analysis, and the entire premise of this exercise is to help you guys understand where the holes in your bucket currently lie. Why is that important? Because we don't want to start filling a bucket that's leaking. Guys, for a limited time only, I'm going to be offering this as a free giveaway. It's $350, but for you site shedders, you're going to get it for free. You need to head across to tradie.wiki/grow and enter the code SiteShed to get it for nothing. Off the back of it, book a time to have a chat and we'll see where it takes us. We're looking forward to helping you and seeing where your opportunities lie. Today's podcast has been proudly brought to you by Tradie Web Guys. Tradie Web Guys work with tradespeople only on their websites and marketing solutions to help them stand out from their competition. Everything from web design through to SEO, search engine marketing, content creation, you name it, guys. It is a customized solution for trade-based organizations and it's fantastic. Head across to tradiewebguys.com.au/apply, fill in the form and let's have a conversation.
Giving tradies and contractors around the globe the tools to run a modern business. You're listening to Toolbox Talks from the Site Shed. Now here's your host, Matt Jones.
John, welcome back to the Site Shed podcast.
Thanks for having me back, man.
We left a bit of a cliffhanger with the last episode in the space of systems, what acquirers are looking for when it comes to a systemized business, so on and so forth. For you guys that did not check out the last episode, I really encourage you to go do that. John is the author of some amazing books, all of them in the foreground there to his picture. But if you guys are tuning in via audio, he wrote a book called Built to Sell. He wrote a book called The Automatic Customer, and he also wrote a book called The Art of Selling Your Business. And John's on the show today for the second part of a conversation. In the first part of the conversation, we were talking specifically to how to structure a business that is not necessarily dependent on you, in which we covered a lot of things like how to build out a recurring revenue model into your trade business, amongst many other things. So please go back and check that out. In this episode today, we're going to bring it full circle with a conversation around what you need to do to actually prepare your business for sale. So John, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. It's great to be chatting about preparing a business to sell. It's an exciting time, right? Like, you only get to do it once in many cases. Do you remember the guy Sully? They made a movie out of him. Sully was the guy who,
not Monsters
Sully.
Inc.
No, not Monsters Inc.
I have a 2-year-old.
Okay, all right. Well, he's sort of the folk hero in the United States. I'm not sure if the story was as big a deal in Australia, but he landed the airplane on the Hudson River just outside New York. Do you remember that guy?
Sure.
Yeah. And Sully, if you see pictures of the guy, he's like in his 60s at this time. He flew for United for 40 years, something like that. Trained young pilots, did these simulators, was trained on every possible airplane. Yet he'd never had the chance to land an airplane on the Hudson River.
I remember the audio as clear as day. We're going in the Hudson.
Yeah.
We're
landing no, Teterboro's just 3 miles down there. Nope, we're going to the Hudson.
We're going on the Hudson.
Yeah. But look, I think it's an interesting analogy for a lot of trades business people who have built a company for 30 years. They know everything there is to know about doing a job, hiring, quoting jobs, dealing with suppliers, insurance, everything. There's no element of their business they couldn't talk to you about all day long. Yet they probably never had the opportunity to sell their business. And so much of the value, I think, is either captured or lost in the last chapter of the game. It's the last few months where you're preparing your business to be sold that so much of the value gets created or lost. And so it's a subject that I think is really important.
It ties in heavily to that whole concept around taking your intellectual knowledge and turning it into intellectual property, right? So much of this of this thing that so much of what we need in order to build a business that can be acquired needs to come out of your head and go into, needs to be documented. For the reasons that you just said, you could know, and you would likely know everything across the board in relation to how to run your business because you've been doing it for so long and likely and possibly very well. But that essentially becomes irrelevant unless you've got it documented somewhere so somebody can basically pick up where you left off.
Absolutely right. In fact, there's, one of the things we talk a lot about is, it's a horrible name, but it's referred to as pre-diligence. You probably heard of due diligence, right? Which is where you agree with an acquirer on a price to buy your business, and then they do their diligence over 30, 60, 90 days where they try to figure out if what you've told them in the process is actually true. Well, there's something called pre-diligence, and it's basically documenting all of your business, including your processes, but also, right down to your lease agreements and your customer agreements, and your supplier agreements, your employee agreements, all that stuff, getting that all kind of put together into a binder or cloud-based. What's that?
Collated.
Yeah, collated, exactly. And it's when I tell business owners this is an important step, they kind of roll their eyes and they're like, why would I do that if I don't have a firm offer? Like, why would I go through all that hassle? The reason you do it, I was taught by a guy named Michael Houlihan, and Michael Houlihan ran a company called Barefoot Winery. Barefoot is a big winery in the United States. They got great distribution all over the United States, Trader Joe's and others. Well, he decided that he wanted to sell the business, and the natural acquirer for his business was a company called E&J Gallo, which is like the largest winemaker in the United States. Crappy wine, but a big successful company. And Houlihan says, these guys are in a position to buy my business. They are, they're going to pay the most. And instead of approaching them kind of hat in hand saying, hey, would you like to do a deal, whatever, he did his pre-diligence. And I said, look, why did you do that without knowing that they were interested? And he said, here's the thing. We showed up ready for the dance. We showed up with everything kind of put together already. And when that was the way we sort of turned up to E&J Gallo with this binder in place and all the ducks in a row and everything we were communicating something. We were communicating that they had the first dibs at buying the business, but if they were to turn us down or drag their feet, we were going to the next closest rival.
Sure.
And it was a way to subtly communicate that we were actually going to sell. They had first dibs, but we weren't. Yeah. We were serious about it. And I think I've always remembered that as this sort of cool, almost creating tension, competitive tension without actually having a competing offer, is to have your business look so buttoned up that it's clear to the buyer that you're for real and that you're going to sell, if it's not to them, to somebody else.
I know in The Art of Selling Your Business, your book, you dive deep into some of those strategies, and there's a bunch of lessons there to learn around how much information to give at what point and how to present it and how to find your buyer pool and, how to attract them in. So you're creating a bit of competition if there's different strategies in the book around that, which is amazing. So go and read that for you guys that have not yet. But yeah, it's an interesting, I know what you're saying. Like for a lot of these guys, it may seem unnecessary, but the reality is it's kind of good practice anyway, right? Like having that stuff all collated in one place, it's not a lot of work. If you've got one folder that lives in your Google Drive, which has all that information in it, I mean, how hard is that? We do a similar thing. Well, I learned this the hard way as well, but when people invite me on a podcast, or if it's for, if they want to quote something in a newspaper or whatever it might be, they're always asking for certain things. We need profile photos, we need bios, we need blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. So after a while, I realized that the easiest way to do this is to create a media folder. And whenever somebody asks for something, I just send them one link. That's always done, right? Same sort of thing. Like it just reduces a whole bunch of work, and it just keeps everything centralized and collated in the one place. And it's easy. And you can add to it if you need to, or you can, remove from it if you need to. So, yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. So at the end of the last episode, we touched on systems and we touched on systemizing your business. And one of the conversations that I wanted to talk to you about was, what does it look like when somebody comes along to acquire a business? In my experience, and I have never done this personally, but I've seen businesses that do it, and I've worked in businesses that do it. They normally are buying a couple of things. They normally are buying the database first of all, so who they can market to or who they can bring into their ecosystem so they can, cross-sell or upsell or whatever it might be. And they're also buying, whether they know it or not, the processes, like what runs the business beyond the business owner. We touched on it a little bit in the last episode, but I want to dive deep into that because I read after just finishing, the art of selling a business, and I hadn't really considered this, but of course, if somebody has an established organization, they already have processes in place, and then your business comes into their mix, and they've either got to figure out a way to migrate those processes in, or they just chop them and adopt their own, which can very likely be the detriment of that acquisition, down the track. So I'm keen to hear your take on this.
Yeah, I think it's worth exploring the three different kinds of business buyers because I found that they've had different motivations and value different things. So individual investors is one group of business buyers. And for your small trades companies, maybe less than $1 million in turnover, or maybe less than $2 million in turnover, individual investors are likely the most likely buyer. That's somebody who wakes up in the morning and says, I want to own a roofing company. I want to own a carpet cleaning company. And I want to move to Gold Coast, or I want to move to Sydney, and I'm going to go buy a business in order to have a job effectively. Right. That's an individual investor. They value your business being a turnkey business, meaning they can turn the key and it will run smoothly. And so systems and processes and not being dependent on you personally is going to be hugely important for those investors. Private equity groups is the second of the three types of buyers, and they're buying effectively one thing. They're buying your future stream of profit, meaning we all think about them buying your customer lists or a location or, all the things that we are proud of. None of those things is actually what they value. What they value is your future stream of profit. And so a private equity company is going to be trying to evaluate how likely your future stream of profit is going to continue. Right. Now, all the things you talked about, customer list and location, employees, all are good predictive variables, but that's not what they buy. They buy the future stream profit. And so again, systems are going to be important to a private equity group because they are proven to create profit, which is what they're after. The third kind of buyer is a strategic buyer, and their motivation is different again. What they're trying to do is find something that they're basically viewing your business is worth more in their hands than it is in your hands. And so they're trying to say, if we buy this business based on the assets we already have, our customer list, our number of our trucks, our technicians, our brand, whatever, it's going to be a whole lot more valuable in our hands than it will be in your hands. And that's a strategic acquisition. And for them, they're most likely valuing something that you do that is unique in the marketplace. And if you've documented what makes you unique, that puts you in much better stead to get valued by a strategic. But the value in your company goes up across that spectrum. So generally the lowest offers are provided by individual investors. Private equity groups are in the middle, and strategic buyers usually pay the most for your business because they've got some strategic assets they can bring to bear.
Interesting. And I think that probably the last one there, the strategic buyer, is probably a little bit more common within the trades because you might get a situation where you're an established plumbing company and you want to add an electrical division to your company. Absolutely. You've already got the database, but now you want an ability to be able to offer your customers an additional service. So you might acquire an electrical company. So that's actually something that we probably see more often than not.
Yeah. And so one of the things that, so it can be that you want to sell or cross-sell an additional service to an existing customer. So your plumbing company says, I'm going to get into roofing because I have this whole great customer list and they already trust me and blah, blah. That's one way that strategic buyers buy. The other way is that they think that by buying your business, they're going to sell more of their product or service. So I can't think of one off the top of my head, but when you effectively buy a business because it makes you more able to compete with someone who you're competing with, it allows you to differentiate your offering. That's when it can be very valuable in the eyes of an acquirer because it allows you to basically compete. It allows them to compete with another direct competitor.
So in order for that to be a successful transaction, I suppose you need to look both at what's a win for both the acquirer and obviously what's a win for you, you're probably less likely to communicate what a win is for you. And I learned that in your book. Like if you want to say, oh, I want to sell the business because I want to retire, probably a bit of a red flag. But if you sell the business, I want to sell my business because I can see a future, but there's so much potential in blah, 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 whatever, for whoever wants to bring it on. And that's kind of a different dynamic.
Yeah.
There's an art to that conversation, isn't there? And again, guys, go read the book, but maybe you could touch on that just a little bit.
Yeah, look, I think there's there's a couple questions that you're likely to get answered or get asked. And one of them is, why do you want to sell, right? And in most cases, you've just tried to make the case to an acquirer that your business is amazing and that the customers love you and you make all this profit and revenue and you're just an incredible business, right? And so an acquirer worth of salt is going to look at you and say, well, sounds like a great business. Like, why do you want to sell it? And I think there's a right and wrong way to answer that. I think the wrong way, especially if you're 40 or 30 or 50, is to say, oh, I just want to go do something else. Or I think we're sort of reached our peak or something like that. That's a disaster. And again, it comes down to how old you are. If you're older and you're 65, I think it's legitimate to say, look, I'm just at a point in my life where I want to retire. So I want to be part of a transition, but I'm kind of ready. If you're 35, I think you want to say, look, we're at a point in our business where we're looking for a partner that can bring some strategic resources to the table and help us get to the next level. It's all just BS corporate speak that says that, you're willing to stick around for a couple of years to help them monetize what they've bought. But you want to make sure it doesn't look like you're leaving a burning house, so to speak. The second question that I think you alluded to is maybe even more common and can be even more disastrous. And that is, what do you want for your company? And, it comes off as a bunch of different ways. Someone will say, let's not waste each other's time. Matt, you're a super busy guy. You've got this great, amazing digital agency. You got the podcast. Like, let's not screw around. Like, let's not waste each other's time. Like, just make sure there's a fit here. What do you want for your company? Or, it'll be after a couple glasses of wine at dinner. And you're like, have you given any thought to like what it might be worth? And, whatever. They'll try in lots of different ways to tease out of you your number.
Because once they get that number, they're never going above it.
Yeah, well, they're never going above it, and they're going to make it their mission to go below it. I learned this from Chris Jones. So Chris Jones, this guy wrote about the book. He built a great company called Pepper Jam. He gets a call from a guy named Michael Rubin, who is sort of a tech luminary. And Rubin says, hey, why don't you come down here, Chris, and let me learn a little bit more about Pepper Jam. And Chris kind of goes down thinking, man, this is going to be great. I'm going to sit in front of one of my kind of like heroes, right? And Rubin opens his door and he's not alone. Beside him is his chief financial officer, his chief legal counsel. And without even exchanging pleasantries, Chris Jones or Michael Rubin says, like, what do you want for Pepper Jam? And Jones is like on his back foot saying, what do you mean? What do I want for Pepper Jam? He's like, no, how much do you want to sell your company for? And, Jones was totally caught off guard, but he kind of blurted out a number, right? And then, Rubin, without even acknowledging Chris,
I think we can manage that.
What's that?
I think we can handle that.
Yeah, he said to his chief financial officer, he said something like, I think we can get a deal done, which was basically code for don't pay a penny more than that number. And then, I asked Chris, like, if you had a mulligan, like, what would you do differently? And he said, I probably wouldn't have answered that question. I probably would have rehearsed my answer to that question. And I think everybody should rehearse their answer. I think it can be a trap. Equally, some people are like, oh, I'll just throw out some crazy high number and I'll never put a ceiling on which my business will be bought. The problem with that is you can look like a quack.
Yeah.
You can look like a complete nut job. If you throw out some number like 20 times EBITDA for your business, a lot of buyers will go, okay, Matt's a lunatic, and they'll walk on, right? And they won't engage. And you don't want to turn an acquirer off. And so I think there's no good way to answer that question if you throw out a number. I think the better way is just to simply say, look, I'm a reasonable guy. The company's not for sale, but I'm happy to look at an offer that you think is reasonable. Yeah. And kind of put it back on them to make the first move.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's really common with a number of things. Even I was talking about this a little while back with like contracts, and I was talking to a contract lawyer and, that situation where you're on a job and it's like, here, sign this. And it's like a document like that. You're like, there's not a chance in hell I'm signing this without getting my lawyer to read it, Yeah. So, but most people would probably be like, oh, okay, sure. No worries. Bang. Just basically signed away all your properties and, your mother. Yeah, I think there's so much to be said about just slowing down and taking your time with things, and even responding to emails and things like that, just you don't feel like you have to say yes all the time. I mean, obviously they want you to say yes. That's the point of having all these people putting pressure on you in an office, standing around you going, sign.
Yeah.
Tying it back, preparing a business, for sale. Obviously, we've covered processes. Sure, we've covered having all of those things, pre-diligence, sort of, which again is probably good practice for anyone out there. Anyway, understanding what your business is worth, I guess, is that part of pre-diligence, or is that just smart?
No, I think it's really smart. We talk a lot about this thing called the freedom point, and the freedom point is the point at which selling your company will generate enough liquid wealth that you can live for the rest of your life.
Right.
And if you're wondering what that number is, basically take how much income you need and multiply it by 33. So if you're, just for round numbers, if you want 100 grand a year of income, multiply that by 33 and you get to $3.3 million.
Okay.
And that's a pretty good proxy. $3.3 million will very conservatively throw off 100 grand a year at a 3% withdrawal rate, which most financial advisors think is a relatively conservative. You probably heard of the 4% rule. Yeah. So this is 3%. So it's pretty conservative, pretty likely. And so first step, figure out, what kind of income you want in your next stage of your life. Most people listening to this are not going to go retire and play golf all year. They're going to do something else. They're going to travel. They're going to write a book or do whatever.
Sure.
So I think you want to figure out how much you want, multiply it by 33. And when you're the liquid, your after-tax proceeds of selling your business would allow you to have a nest egg that big. I think it's just worth asking the question, like, you've reached your freedom point. Do you want to risk financial freedom, which is what you've created through your company? Do you want to risk that for the next stage on the ladder, right? The next step on the ladder. Some people do, right? They want to build a big business, famous, entrepreneur, whatever. But in essence, it's like the poker player, who's won sort of 5 blackjack hands at Las Vegas, again and again and again, and putting all his chips or her chips on the table every hand. Because as an entrepreneur, most entrepreneurs I know, their business is like 80, 90% of their net worth, right?
Right.
And they're effectively risking it, all the chips on the table every day. They continue to be so weighted towards their business. And so I think it's just a moment in time where you can just pull up and say, do I want to risk what I've aspired for all my life, which is financial freedom, for the next step on the ladder? And I think when you reach that point.
I like the case study in The Art of Selling Your Business too, with the founder of Xero, the New Zealand fellow.
Yeah.
That was great, because I didn't know his prehistory. I just knew, obviously, Xero is like by far the largest bookkeeping software in Australia and New Zealand.
Rod Drury's the guy. And before he built Xero, he started a company called Aftermail. And he's in Wellington, New Zealand at the time. And Aftermail was just an idea. There's this legislation in the United States called Sarbanes-Oxley, which I won't go into details, but basically you had to do a better job of archiving your business email and stuff. Yeah. And he's like, all these big Fortune 500 companies are going to need to archive this stuff. So he built this, basically a simple software tool that allow you to archive your email and search back and so forth. He got 2 enterprise customers to buy it, and each of them paid $1 million a year. So he had $2 million in revenue. And what would most people do at that stage? Most people, I think, would say, great, we've got 2 customers. There's another 498 Fortune 500 companies out there. Let's go sell to everybody else. Drury, to his credit, didn't do that. He said, I'm going to go sell the company. And he found a company called Quest Software, which had all 500 Fortune 500 companies as clients.
Right.
And he said, look, you guys need this. All of your customers are asking for it. Why don't you just buy my company? Anyways, he sold his $2 million business for what the Wellington, New Zealand papers reported as $35 million. The deal structure was 15 up front and 20 tied to an earnout. Long story, he didn't actually achieve his earnout, and he left well before the earnout timeframe. So he walked away from $20 million potential, but he got the $15 million up front. And it's a story in the book, and it talks about earnouts in particular and the danger of those at times.
And what I was alluding to with that is, very often, like the goal of sometimes people that want to sell a business is not to retire. It might be because they want to do something else. Maybe they've got another, there may be other reasons.
Right. And I think one of the things I've been doing this podcast, Built to Sell Radio, for 5 years, right? And one of the things I've seen, and I interview different entrepreneurs who've sold their company. One of the things I've seen is that most entrepreneurs who sell, they don't go off and retire. They go start another business.
Sure.
And oftentimes the second or third business is way more valuable than the first.
Well, of course.
We learn a ton, right, through doing. And I've heard it referred to, and kind of pejoratively, I'm not sure it's a very flattering analogy, but the first business is your like training wheels business, right?
Totally.
It's where you cut your teeth, where you learn everything, and you miss out on all the value if you just stop on your training wheels business, sell that puppy, and then apply what you learned to your second, apply what you learned to your third. And that's where some of these people like Rod Drury have these incredible successes, because they have a few singles, to use a baseball analogy, in advance of their the big win business.
And to be fair, I have seen this a number of times in trades as well. Like that first business, like you say, training wheels, and then once they get rid of that for whatever. And sometimes they've been forced into getting rid of it for reasons that, to be fair, it probably was their fault, but things that they're ignorant towards. I've seen companies lose their business over negative media, and then they've gone and start up another business and they've done really well from it. And those training, it was such a valuable lesson, which has set them up for an amazing business foundation looking forward. Like that happens, So
totally. But I think a lot of times, Matt, I'm sure you've seen this, your business becomes sort of successful. Maybe you're turning over $1 million or a couple $1 million in revenue. You got $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in profit. You got the truck paid for, you got the house paid for, everybody's happy, you got the toys. And then you kind of become inert, right? Where things are good. I don't want to mess with anything. And that's when I think we run the risk of riding it over the top.
Yeah.
And I think there's just, like if you have that situation, a couple $1 million in revenue, $300,000 or $400,000 in profit, like that's a sellable company. And in many ways, I wondered, would you be better off selling it and then moving on to the next one? But
you're green and growing, or you're ripe and rotting. Have you heard that saying?
I haven't. You Aussies are so into your sayings. I love it.
Mate, this has been awesome. We could talk for days on these topics, but I know you've got an engagement to get to. And to be honest with you, I would rather leave this in the hands of the viewers and the listeners out there and say, guys, go read the books, because there's so much of what John talks about are in these books, and they're all just jam-packed full of amazing information. Head across to builttosell.com/shed. Links will be in the show notes. I'll also put links to where you can get hold of John on social and that kind of thing. Is there anything you want to close off on, John?
No, it's just, I think this has been fun, and I love what you're doing with trade businesses. I think that's a great niche, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat with you.
Mate, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And listeners, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to another episode of Toolbox Talks. If you're liking what you hear, then you can head across to thesiteshed.com, where you can join our community by signing up to our Toolbox Talks. You'll get sent a weekly notification, which is basically a highlight of everything that we've spoken about during that week, along with any other industry news that may be relevant or specific to the trades. If you're enjoying the show, you can head across to iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, where you can leave us a review. That would be fantastic, and all the reviews get read out in the show. Likewise, if you have any friends or colleagues that you think would benefit from the show and the episodes that we create, then please go ahead and share it with them.